Hi, and welcome back to PySimpleGUI 2020, Part 5, Shortcuts. I'm, you might call lazy programmer in some ways. I like compact code, clearly, and I'd like to type as little as possible. I like hotkeys. I already mentioned that I have a single key on my keyboard that runs whatever program is on the screen. And one of the things I like about Python and built into PySimpleGUI is the ability to alias classes, functions, by using simple assignment. So you'll find all of the elements, pretty much all of them, have a shortened version. So text has at least 3 versions. Input text has at least 4. So you can write sg.text, as you already know in your layouts. You can also write T. And I did this because it can cause your layouts to become much smaller if you use the single letter ones in particular. And when you have a complex layout with a whole lot of elements, it's nice when you can fit it all on a single line or on a single screen. It's just a great way to cut out the amount of code that you're reading and typing. And at some point, you know that button is B. sg.b is the same as button, or sg.t is text, and you don't need to type it out every time as text. In particular for input, I don't think I ever type input text. It's either input or I. And the way these are done, if you look at the code, it is simple assignment. And you can do that yourself as well. Let's say instead of input text, you want to call it Fred. You can just say Fred is the same as sg input text. And then you can say Fred sub whatever. And in there, you'll notice if you do Control P, it has all the same parameters that your input text has. And if it wasn't for a fact that there's a bug in PyCharm, if you did Control Q on it, you would get the correct doc strings. But there's a bug in PyCharm where it does not carry forward these doc strings the way it should. So you have to use the long format in order to get the full doc strings for classes. Like here, input text, you'll see all of the doc strings are there. If you did the shortened version, it simply shows that it does map to input text, but it doesn't give you the full documentation from the doc strings. It will tell you the parameters if you do a Control P, but you lose all of the other documentation. In addition to shortened versions of the elements, there are shortened versions of calls as well. We'd already talked about previously that window.findElement can be replaced with brackets like a dictionary lookup. Window.findElement is the same as this kind of dictionary lookup. Let's pull up some code here to look at. So here in this case, it would be window sub whatever the key is, right, is the same as window.findElement. There is also 2 other shortcuts that you won't see very often, and it's because they're a little bit confusing, and it's hard to say whether or not there's much of a payoff. But you can call windows and you can call elements, and by that I mean instead of calling read, you can call the object. So this is the window object, and I'm calling it here. I'm not calling SG window, I'm calling window. And that is the same as window.read. So if I run this program, we get a warning from this other stuff up here. Let's get rid of this. If we run this program, you'll see that it displays a window and stuff just as if this was a read call, because it is. If you call an element, it's the same as calling update for that element. It's a little weird. At this point, I don't recommend using those two, but they're there. Another concept that you'll see is what I call user-defined elements. One thing I wanted to mention about compression in general, in code compression, and that is that it's a multi-pass activity, for me at least. When you see a piece of code of mine that is extremely short, chances are it did not start that way. You're seeing the end result. It's a multi-pass thing, and so sometimes it's 3 or 4 passes by the time it gets down to 1 or 2 lines of code instead of 8 or 10 lines of code. So I suggest that you go back and look at your programs when you're at the kind of the polishing stage. Go through and do a pass and see if there are more efficient ways of writing the code, if you should rewrite small portions of it. Okay, so user-defined elements. These are discussed in, I want to say, the cookbook as well as the main documentation. Let me show you an example of this. The functions are an important part of PySimpleGUI. There are some buttons like submit that are functions, and they look like they look like objects in terms of how they're spelled. Like submit is a shortcut button, right? So when I run this, you will see a submit button here. There are OK is one, cancel is one. So you could say here sg.ok, sg.cancel. And it's just a way to, instead of writing out button, all that, of getting these buttons just by writing OK and cancel instead of writing out button. Those are documented. There's a good long list of those that are available. So user-defined elements are functions that return elements. So let me put together a full window layout here that takes your name, address, and phone number. So you will first have some text that's like enter your name, and we want these to have labels that all line up and are right justified. So let's say the size is 12. We're going to justify to the right, and let's say the font is Courier 14. And let's run this and see what that looks like. Okay, so it looks sort of like that. That's not too bad. So if we repeat this and we have name, address, phone, let's run that again, and that's nice. And then let's add an input here as well. And we're going to need keys on these at some point, but just for testing purposes, let's just jot them down without keys and let PySimpleGUI number them for you automatically. So it looks sort of like this, right? It's not a bad looking little form we got going. The trouble I have with this is it's a little bit messy. I mean, there's just a lot here, right? And I can shorten it by saying T, but there's just a lot of parameters that are getting copied over and over again. And we're going to do the same here with parameters on the input. Let's say that we want these to be 20 characters each, and we're going to have a key. In this case, let's say the name, right? And it will begin to get very wordy very quickly, and your layout just starts to look bad. It's just very wordy. And so the solution to that is to use these things that I call user-defined elements. And all they are functions that return elements. So in this case, let's call this thing, we'll call it data in, and we'll name it as if it's an object. And what we need when we're displaying so the idea is to try to make a row that looks like one of these. So what changes for these is the text that goes there, right? So we're going to need some text, and then we need a key that goes with our input. And so let's just copy this, in fact, paste this, and we'll put our text there where the text goes, and where the key is, we're going to put our key, and we'll just return this row. And so now I can say data in, and I'm going to say name, right? And a key, like that. And let's just run this and see what happens with it like this. It's got a duplicate key, you'll notice, because name got duplicated, but it looks the same. This row and this one appear the same in our window. So let's do that for address and phone. And here we're going to say address and phone, and we can delete these, and when we run it, we have our nice name, address, and phone. Let's say I don't like the width of that. Let's make this 35 characters, and you notice something right away there, that I changed one spot and it changed all of these inputs for me. So, and our layout is much nicer looking now. Instead of having all of these parameters duplicated in the layout, instead I've got this user-defined element instead. This particular example, it goes sort of beyond an element. It's a full row. So in a way, it's more like a data row. Shift F6 is your friend in PyCharm. Data row, and I do a refactor, and it fixes it right up. So that's what the term user-defined elements, when you see that, that's what it's referring to. It's taking a PySimpleGUI element or elements and returning them from a function so that you can use your function directly in your layout. And you'll see more of this kind of thing further along when we get into computed layouts or constructed layouts, where we create layouts using list comprehensions. So that's it for this lesson. Hope you've enjoyed it, and I urge you to use these rather than doing a bunch of copy and pastes.